The night sky over Seoul was heavy with clouds. The moon hid behind the darkness as if mourning in silence. In the corner of a dim hotel room, a young man sat quietly. A black hoodie pulled low over his face, his body slouched against the wall, eyes blankly staring out the window. It was Jungkook, the world's golden boy, the youngest in BTS. But tonight, he was simply a young man, completely worn out. Schedules that never end. Unrealistic expectations. Relentless rumors. Loneliness that gnawed at him behind every flashing stage light. All of it crushed him in silence. His trembling hand reached for his phone. He scrolled through endless messages from fans. Some were filled with love, others piercing criticism. But one message made him stop and stare. "You look tired, Jungkook. If you're struggling, it's okay to rest. But please, don't disappear. This world feels too empty without you." A tear slid down his cheek, then another, and another, until they all broke free, like rain he had held back for too long. He covered his face with both hands, shoulders shaking. If it weren't for Army, his voice cracked into a fragile whisper, "I would have given up." Have you ever truly imagined what it's like to be Jungkook? A boy who grew up under the gaze of millions. A soul judged for every step he takes. A heart that's forced to smile even when it's quietly breaking. How many times has he had to swallow his own pain just to sing the next song? How many nights has he stayed awake, whispering to the ceiling, "Am I enough?" While the world slept, he remained wide awake, alone, listening to the ticking of a clock that never seemed to stop. In that darkness, he searched for light, and he found it in your voices. "Army," he whispered again, this time a little louder. "I'm still here, because of you." He opened a drawer, pulled out a photo, an old one. 7 boys smiling wide, gripping each other's hands. They once were just dreams from a small town. Now they were the hope of millions. But the cost? A childhood given away. A life dissected under microscopes. A heart so fragile, yet forced to appear unbreakable. You once asked, is Jungkook truly happy? But did you really want the answer? Does he smile because he's genuinely joyful? Or because he doesn't want you to worry? Army. Do you remember how small he was when they debuted? Do you remember the way he held the mic with trembling fingers? Do you realize he's grown up, but so have his wounds? He never asked for more. He just wanted to sing, to be heard, to feel seen, not just as an idol, but as a person. That night he curled up on the cold floor, hoodie still covering his face. And then his phone lit up again. "We will always love you, no matter what, from your forever Army." He stared at the screen, long and hard. And for the first time that night, he smiled through his tears. Army. Would you still love him if one day he was too exhausted to smile? Would you wait for him, even if it took a long time for him to come back? Or do you only love him when he shines? Jungkook doesn't need your applause. He needs to know he's enough, even when he's not perfect. If you still love him, whisper this quietly in your heart now. You're not alone, Jungkook. We're here, always. Because sometimes, that's all it takes for someone to hold on. And maybe, just maybe, that's what saved Jungkook. That very night, the next morning, the world outside resumed its usual chaos. Cars honking, screens flashing, media speculating. But inside that room, time moved slowly. Jungkook sat on the edge of the bed, eyes swollen, heart still heavy. He didn't speak. He didn't sing. He just breathed, as if reminding himself that he still could. His phone buzzed again, this time with a voice note. It was from Jimin. "Hyung tahu kamu capek. Tapi ingat, kamu nggak sendirian. Ikaw semuanya sinibuat dom. Jangan simpan semuanya sendiri, Jungkook." Jungkook closed his eyes. Even when words failed him, the members never did. But the voice that haunted him most wasn't from outside. It was his own, that small whispering doubt. "Apa aku masih layak dicintai jika aku tak bisa terus jadi sempurna?" And again, he turned to the one place where he always found raw, honest love. His fans. He opened his fan platform. Messages flooded in, some funny, some poetic, many just a simple, "We love you." But one message struck his heart like lightning. "You don't owe us perfection, Jungkook. We love the real you, even the tired, broken, messy you. Because you're human too. And that's more than enough for us." He read it over and over. His chest tightened, not from sadness this time, but release. He finally allowed himself to cry, not because he was hurting, but because he felt seen. Later that evening, he took his guitar, fingers shaky, voice soft. He didn't hit the high notes. He didn't film it. He just sang, a melody no one heard, but one his soul had been waiting for. Even if the lights fade, and the cheers turn to silence, if one heart still beats for me, I will sing again. He whispered into the dark. "Thank you, Army, for not letting me disappear." But even with love flooding his world, the war inside wasn't over. That's the part many don't see, right? Behind every confident stare, every smirk on camera, is a battle, a voice whispering, you're not enough. And Jungkook? He's been fighting that voice for years. But now, he's no longer fighting alone. What if one day he walks off stage and doesn't look back? What if he chooses peace over performance? Would you still stand by him? What if your idol becomes just a boy again? Quiet, unseen, ordinary. Would your love remain the same? Because Jungkook's deepest fear isn't fading from fame. It's losing the one thing that kept him alive. You, the ones who cheered him on when he doubted himself. The ones who screamed his name when he forgot who he was. The ones who never stopped believing in the boy from Busan. That night, for the first time in a long while, he wrote in his journal, "Today, I cried again. But it wasn't from pain. It was love. Real, raw, quiet love from those I've never met. But somehow they know me best. If one person still waits for me tomorrow, I'll keep going." So the next time you watch him on stage, don't just see the perfect performance. Look deeper. See the boy who stayed when it would have been easier to leave. The boy who whispers thank you more often than we'll ever hear. The boy who gave the world his everything because your love gave him a reason to. Another day passed, then another, and slowly, the silence inside Jungkook's heart began to shift. He didn't heal overnight. He still woke up feeling empty some mornings, still looked in the mirror and wondered if the reflection staring back was truly him, or just the version everyone wanted him to be. But there was a difference now. A light, a soft, steady glow that reminded him, you're not alone. He started writing again. Not songs for an album, not lyrics for the charts, just letters. To Army, to himself, to the little boy he used to be. One night he wrote this. To the kid who left home at 13. I'm sorry you missed birthdays. I'm sorry you cried alone in dorm rooms and ate cold meals after long practices. I'm sorry no one saw how scared you were when the lights went off. But look how far you've come. Look at the millions of hearts that beat with yours now. And then he wrote another. Dear Army, some nights I still wonder, would you still love me if I stopped singing? If one day I walked away, would you search for me in silence? Or would I fade from your hearts? But then I remember your voices, your tears, your belief in me. And I stay. Because of you, I choose to stay. Behind the scenes, the members watched him quietly. Namjoon left a book by his bedside about healing. Yoongi passed him a USB with instrumentals, in case you want to write again. Taehyung stayed up late with him, no words, just presence. Jimin held his hand the night he had a panic attack. Seokjin texted every morning with only one message. You're doing great. Kook, don't forget to breathe. And Hoseok? He danced for him, made him laugh, reminded him joy still existed. And slowly, the broken pieces of Jungkook began to form a new shape. Not the boy he was, not the perfect idol the world saw, but a man, soft, scarred, and stronger than ever. One day, while watching old concert footage, he paused at a moment. It was the end of a show. He had dropped to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably while the crowd chanted his name. At the time, people thought it was gratitude, but he remembered it clearly. That night, he had wanted to give up. He had felt numb on stage, like he was singing through glass, disconnected. But when Army started singing Euphoria back to him, every word, every note, he broke. Because in that moment, he wasn't the performer. He was the one being saved. Have you ever wondered how many times Jungkook was saved by your love? Without you ever knowing? How many nights your words reached him when he was too tired to reach back? How many times your quiet support held him together while the world pulled him apart? Weeks later, Jungkook stepped into the studio again. But this time there was no pressure, no camera, no deadline. He sat alone, closed his eyes, and let himself feel. And from that silence, a song was born. Not for charts, not for records, but for healing. The lyrics, they were simple, raw, almost like a letter. I'm not perfect. I get tired, but I'm still here, because you waited for me. And when he finally shared it on live, the chat exploded with tears. Army didn't care if it wasn't polished. They didn't care if his voice cracked. They cried because they felt him. Not just the artist, but the person. So now, whenever you see Jungkook smile, remember this. That smile was earned, fought for, protected, by love, by music, by you. Army, if he forgets again, remind him. He doesn't have to shine to be loved. He doesn't have to sing to be heard. He doesn't have to be perfect to be enough. The following weeks passed in a blur of gray skies and quiet mornings. Jungkook kept moving, one breath, one thought, one moment at a time. He wasn't fully okay, but he was trying. And for someone who once considered disappearing completely, trying was already a miracle. He started finding beauty in the little things again. The warmth of coffee, the sound of rain against the window, the way the members laughed like nothing had changed, even when everything had. Yet sometimes, in the stillness between days, the weight returned. A heavy silence that settled on his chest like fog. A voice that echoed, "Are you really enough without the stage?" There was a night, a stormy one, where he sat alone on the rooftop, hoodie soaked in rain, and whispered to the dark sky, "What if they love the idea of me, not me?" No one answered. Not the clouds, not the thunder, not the stars. But then, his phone buzzed. A message. Not from a celebrity or manager or even a friend, but from someone named Rin, 2015 Army. He hesitated before opening it. But what he read made his entire world pause. "You probably won't read this, but just in case you do, I wanted to say thank you. You saved me in 2018 when I was in my darkest place. I lived because your voice reminded me I still had light inside me. And I want you to know, if you ever feel like giving up, please remember this. You've already saved someone's world. Now let us hold yours." His lips trembled. Not because of the cold, but because of the truth in those words. All his life he had given himself away. In songs, in performances, in every drop of sweat left on stage. But he had forgotten something. That maybe he didn't have to carry everyone alone. The next day, he returned to the studio. Not to record, just to sit. He closed the door, pulled out his notebook, and wrote a single line. "Even when I'm silent, Army still hears me." And for the first time in a long time, he felt peace. He began to speak more openly during lives. He laughed more, told silly stories. But he also allowed himself to cry sometimes. He let the mask fall. And Army? They didn't run. They didn't get bored. They didn't look away. They stayed. They listened. They reminded him, "You are not your image. You are not your perfection. You are not your schedule. Your weight, your high notes, your muscles, your tattoos, or your mistakes. You're just Jungkook, and we love you." At an award show, months later, when he stood under the spotlight again, hair tied, hands slightly shaking, he didn't say the usual scripted thank yous. He took a breath, looked straight into the camera, and said with raw honesty, "I almost gave up, but Army held me when I couldn't hold myself. This award is not mine. It belongs to the ones who reminded me how to live again." The crowd fell silent, then erupted in applause, not for the trophy, but for the truth. Later that night, he sat backstage, alone, holding his phone. He scrolled through comments. One caught his eye. "You don't have to be strong for us. Just be real. We're not here for the stage version of you. We're here for the soul of you." He read it again and again, until his eyes blurred with tears. And in that moment, Jungkook smiled. Not the practiced smile, not the idol smile, but a Jungkook smile. A boy from Busan who survived the world because someone whispered in his darkness, "You matter even when you're tired." So now, when he steps on stage, it's not to prove anything, not to please perfection, not to silence doubt, but to say, "I'm still here, and I'm still yours. Thank you for not letting go." Army, are you still with him? Will you still be there? When the lights fade, when the noise settles, when he steps off stage and becomes just a boy again? Because somewhere, in the quiet hours of the night, Jungkook still asks, "Do they love me? Or the version of me they created?" And your answer might be the only thing that keeps him holding on. The world kept moving. More awards, more headlines, more pressure. But somewhere in between the flashing lights and roaring fans, Jungkook began to ask himself a question he never dared to before. What if I stop? Not just pause, not just rest, but walk away. Not out of anger. Not because he no longer loved BTS or Army, but because he finally realized he never gave himself the chance to truly live. Outside the cameras, outside the curated version of his life. The thought scared him. Not because of what he might lose, but because he didn't know who he'd be without the stage. He brought it up one night during a quiet dinner with the members. The air froze. Namjoon was the first to respond. His voice was soft but steady. "Kook, if that's what your heart's telling you, then it's not wrong." Yoongi simply nodded, sipping his drink, then added, "The world will always ask for more. You don't have to give it everything." Jin, ever the big brother, leaned over and squeezed his shoulder. "You've given more than enough. If you choose yourself now, it's not selfish. It's survival." Taehyung just looked at him, eyes glassy. "You don't need a stage to be loved by us." And Jimin, who had known him since he was barely a teenager, held his hand and whispered, "Whatever you choose, I'll be right beside you. Always." Jungkook didn't respond immediately. He just lowered his head, because for once, he felt free to be honest about the weight he carried. That night, he wrote one sentence in his journal. "I'm terrified of becoming a stranger to myself." And with that, he made a decision. He would take a break. A real one. Not a hiatus with secret schedules behind the scenes. Not a vacation filled with guilt. But space, pure, unfiltered space to breathe. To wake up without rehearsals, to walk without bodyguards, to eat without cameras, to laugh without restraint, to cry without fear. When the news broke, the world reacted instantly. Headlines exploded. Jungkook taking an indefinite break from the spotlight. Fans in shock. What's next for BTS Golden maknae? Did Jungkook just say goodbye? But Army responded differently. The hashtags flooded in. The rest will Jungkook. We will wait for you. You deserve peace. Fan letters poured from every corner of the world. From children who saw him as their hero. From adults who grew up with his music. From people who had survived their darkest moments because his voice reminded them they weren't alone. And once again he was reminded he wasn't stepping away from love. He was walking toward healing. Weeks turned to months. Jungkook was seen in small cafes, hiking in the woods, sketching by the riverside, writing songs only he heard. He smiled more. Not the idle smile, but the kind of smile that comes from rest, from being, from remembering what it's like to be human. He journaled every day. Today I listened to the sound of birds longer than I've ever listened to myself. It felt peaceful. I used to think I only mattered when I performed. Now I know I matter even when I'm still. I miss them, but I don't miss pretending. And then, one morning, he woke up to the sun hitting his face. No alarm, no call time, just warmth. And suddenly, he felt it. A pull. Not pressure, not fear, but longing. Not to return for the world, not for numbers, not for fame, but for connection, for army, for the love that held him up when he was too tired to stand. That night, he opened a live stream. No makeup, no script, just Jungkook, in his sweatshirt, sitting cross-legged on the floor. He looked at the camera, eyes soft, voice trembling, and said, "I didn't know who I was without the noise. Now I do. And I missed you. Not as fans, but as the reason I made it this far." The chat exploded. He read each message with tears in his eyes, laughed, sang a little, showed his dog, told silly stories, paused for long silences that didn't feel awkward anymore, just honest. And before ending, he whispered, "I'm not back because I have to be. I'm back because I want to be, because you waited, and because you reminded me who I really am." Army, are you still listening? Because even now, when the stages are quiet and the cameras fade, Jungkook still wonders, will they stay if I stop being perfect? And your answer, once again, is the light he follows home. Spring had quietly arrived in Seoul. Cherry blossoms danced in the air, the city blooming again, just like him. Jungkook no longer rushed through his days. He breathed slower, walked lighter, and smiled not because the world was watching, but because he finally wanted to smile. Yet there was one thing he hadn't touched since he left the stage: the mic. Not in the studio, not in practice rooms, not even in the shower. It wasn't fear. It wasn't avoidance. It was something deeper, reverence, because the voice that had once saved lives had also nearly destroyed the soul behind it. Then one afternoon, while sorting through old notebooks, Jungkook found a page, torn, crumpled, unfinished. Lyrics he had written in the middle of a breakdown months ago, scrawled between tears and silence. But this time, he didn't look away. He read them, all of them. And when he reached the final line, his breath hitched. "I'm not asking to be loved for my shine, just hold me when I flicker." He sat in stillness, hands trembling, heart wide open. Then slowly, he picked up his guitar. That night, a quiet notification appeared on Weverse. From Jungkook. "This isn't a comeback. This isn't a promotion. This isn't for the world. This is for you, who stayed." Attached, a single audio file. Title, "Still With You," again. No cover, no announcement, no teaser, just his voice. The first notes were gentle, stripped down, raw. And then he sang, not with power, not with flair, but with truth. A voice that cracked in places, that paused to breathe, that trembled like it had been held in too long. When the world went quiet, and I had nothing to give, you stayed, and in your silence, I found my song again. Army cried, all over the world. Not because it was his best performance, but because it was the most honest. It wasn't meant to chart, wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to reach, to touch, to thank. It was a confession, and a homecoming. The next morning, "Still With You," again, was the most talked about topic in the world. But Jungkook didn't post, didn't celebrate. He simply sat on his rooftop, watching the sunrise, hand pressed to his heart, whispering, "I'm still here," because they never left. At a private fan event weeks later, intimate, small, no media, Jungkook walked on stage barefoot, wearing just a simple white shirt. No lights, no choreography, just a stool, a mic, and Army. He looked into their eyes, no filter, no barrier, and said, "This isn't about me performing for you. This is about me standing here. Because of you. He sang the song again, but this time the room joined in. Voices cracked, hands over hearts, tears fell freely, even his. It wasn't a concert. It was a collective healing. Later, someone asked him, "Why didn't you release it officially?" And he smiled gently. "Because some songs aren't for the charts. They're for the hearts that saved you." He didn't announce a tour, didn't sign a new endorsement, didn't post rehearsals or workouts. He just lived, and slowly he started showing up again. On lives, at member birthdays, in random city cafes. Still soft, still growing, still healing. ARMY never pushed, never begged. They waited, patiently, quietly, like they always had. And in that waiting, Jungkook realized something. Love that doesn't demand is the love that lasts. So if you ever hear that song playing late at night, if it finds you when you're at your lowest, if it wraps around your heart like a whisper, that's not an accident. That's Jungkook, somewhere in the world, singing quietly to you. You saved me. Now let me remind you, you're not alone either. Morning came again. This time softer. There was something different in the air. A stillness not born out of sadness, but peace. Jungkook walked barefoot to the window, pulling the curtains aside slowly. A pale gold sunrise filtered into the room, touching his face like a gentle hand. He whispered to himself, "I'm still here." And he was. Still breathing. Still holding on. Still dreaming, just quietly, gently for now. His phone rang. It was Taehyung. Without any formal greeting, Taehyung's sleepy voice filled the speaker. "Bro, aku mimpi aneh. Kamu jalan sendirian di salju, tapi semua jejak kakimu bentuk huruf ARMY. Gila ya?" Jungkook laughed. A real one. Not forced, not for the camera. Mungkin mimpi kamu lebih jujur dari kenyataan. And suddenly, that laugh felt like a revolution. Like hope being stitched back together. Later that day, he walked into the practice room. The lights were dimmed, and the air was warm with nostalgia. Mirrors lined the walls, reminding him of all the hours he'd spent chasing perfection. He stood there in silence. He looked at himself. Not as a performer, not as an idol, but just Jungkook. Messy hair, dark circles, a small scar near his chin. A boy who once stood in a small room at 13, afraid and hopeful all at once. A boy who didn't know that one day, the world would call him golden. He walked closer to the mirror, slowly. He raised his hand and touched the glass. "You made it this far, and you're still standing." He smiled, and it wasn't the polished smile fans were used to. It was raw, pure, healing. That night, he opened his live stream. No filters, no lights, just him. The chat exploded instantly. Hearts, crying emojis, messages from every corner of the world. But he didn't say much at first, just stared at the screen, reading, breathing, and then he spoke. There were moments I wanted to disappear. The comments paused, like the world holding its breath. But each time, your voices brought me back. You reminded me that I'm more than what I do on stage. That even if I fall apart, you'll still stay. And that kind of love, I don't know if I deserve it, but I'm grateful. Every second. He looked down for a moment, blinking back tears. I'm not perfect. I get tired. I get scared. But I'll keep going for you. Because you believed in me when I stopped believing in myself. The screen filled with, "We love you, Jungkook. You're never alone. Thank you for staying." He smiled again. Softly this time. "If it weren't for ARMY, I would have given up." And with those words, he ended the stream. Not because he was done talking, but because his heart had finally spoken. That night, he slept with no background noise. No thoughts racing. Just silence and peace. Because sometimes, surviving is the bravest thing you can do. And Jungkook, he chose to survive, because love showed him how. So now the question is, if he had given up, would you have forgiven the world for breaking him? If one day he vanishes from the spotlight, would you still whisper his name in quiet loyalty? If he chooses a life outside of fame, will your heart still follow the boy who once sang just for you? Because at the end of it all, he is not just a star. He is someone's son, someone's friend, and you're Jungkook. Days passed slowly, not with the rush of schedule after schedule, but with breaths finally exhaled. Jungkook began walking more, not just to the studio or airport, but to places with no flash, no noise, just wind, sky, and the scent of freedom. He'd visit the Han River at midnight, cap pulled low, face masked. Nobody noticed, and maybe for now that was okay. He sat there, legs crossed, watching the ripples of the water reflect moonlight. For once, it wasn't his own reflection staring back, but something else. A quieter self, a softer version, a boy, not an idol. He pulled out his notebook. It wasn't lyrics. It wasn't a plan. It was a letter. To you. Dear Army, I don't know how to say this without crying. There were nights I screamed into pillows, afraid I wouldn't wake up wanting to be alive. Days I pretended to smile on camera, only to collapse backstage wondering if I was still human. But in those moments, you were there. I don't know how, but you were. Your letters, your posts, your way of seeing me even when I couldn't see myself.